Week 13 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few quarterbacks I looked at off the wire this week. The first quarterback, Bryce Young of the Carolina Panthers. Ever since he got benched a few weeks ago, Bryce Young's been back in the lineup, and he's been playing pretty decent football and giving this Panther team a chance to win pretty much weekly. Week 8 at Denver in his return, 224 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 6 rush yards. Week 9 versus Saints, 171 pass yards, a touchdown, an interception, 9 rush yards. Week 10 versus the New York Giants, 126 pass yards, a touchdown, 30 rush yards. And Week 12 in a great game, tough loss at the end there, 30-27, 263 pass yards versus the Chiefs, a touchdown and 20 rush yards. At Week 13, a great matchup here versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, give up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. And Bryce Young, maybe that benching woke him up and he learned things watching the ball games on the sidelines and learning from a veteran like Andy Dalton. So like I said, this week a good matchup versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I know every team is playing this week 13, and then the buys once again week 14 to close out the season. So I know Young more deeper league ed, but he's available right now in 88% of fantasy leagues. Next quarterback, Russell Wilson of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So last week, Wilson, he didn't have a great game for this Pittsburgh Steelers team, but ever since he's been inserted into the starting lineup, they've won 4 out of 5 games. So this week, good matchup at the Bengals. Give up the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. And the last few games for Russ, week 10 at the Commanders, 195 pass yards, 3 touchdowns, interception, 3 rush yards. Week 11 versus Baltimore, 205 pass yards, interception, a rush yard. And week 12 at Cleveland Browns in a snowstorm in the second half of that game, 270 pass yards, a touchdown, 10 rush yards, and a fumble loss. So Wilson, he's playing good football, no doubt about it, for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. He's giving them a chance to win each and every time he's going out there, obviously winning 4 out of 5. And he's got pretty decent weapons. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren out of the backfield, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth in the passing game, and even Calvin Austin's emerged a little bit over the last few weeks. So right now, Russ out there in tons of fantasy leagues. It's still at 64%, and he's got a great matchup this week at Cincinnati. Next quarterback, Drake May of the New England Patriots. He's been on this waiver wire list a lot this season here, is Drake May. And he goes out there and he puts up some decent numbers, I believe, for fantasy owners. So the last few weeks for May, week 10 at the Bears, 184 pass yards, a touchdown, an INT, 24 rush yards. Week 11 versus the Rams, 282 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, an INT, 27 rush yards, a fumble loss. And week 12 in Miami, 222 pass yards, a touchdown, interception, 26 rush yards, a 2-point conversion, and a fumble loss. I know he's a rookie. I know growing pains and turnovers are going to be an issue for Drake May with not a lot of good weapons. Obviously, with Demarion Douglas and Hunter Henry, the top 2 options in the passing game, it's tough at times to be consistent. But May, he makes things happen with his legs. He's hanging in there, making plays. And this week, a good matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts. They give up the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. Right now, May's out there in 81% of fantasy leagues, and definitely a quarterback I would add in deeper league. I look to add Will Levis of the Tennessee Titans. So Will Levis, he's starting to get things going a little bit over the last 3 weeks, getting a little more comfortable in the offense. And this Titan team had an upset victory in week 12 at the Texans, putting up a big game, 32-27. So the last few games for Levis, week 10 at the Chargers, 175 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 41 rush yards. Week 11 versus the Vikings, 295 passing, a touchdown, an interception, 18 rush yards in that game. In week 12 at the Houston Texans in the upset victory, 278 passing, 2 touchdowns, an interception, 10 rush yards, and a fumble loss. So Levis, he's obviously going to turn the football over at a decent rate for this Tennessee Titan team, but he has a strong arm and he drives that football down the field. Then Westbrook-Akeen's been a big-time threat now over the last month of the season. Deep ball threat and a touchdown type of player ever since DeAndre Hopkins got traded. So Will Levis, he locked in with Westbrook-Akeen. Calvin Ridley's been pretty decent over the last month of the season as well. And this week, it's a beatable matchup at the Commanders that just got lit up by Cooper Rush and that Dallas Cowboy offense in week 12. So I think Levis could go out there in week 13 and be a deep league option. 5th and final quarterback I have as an ad this week's Cooper Rush of the Dallas Cowboys. So like I just mentioned, the Cowboys went into Washington and pulled off the upset victory in that game, and Cooper Rush had a nice ball game. And Cooper Rush, he's not a bad backup. We saw a few years ago when Prescott was out, he was 5-1. In the last couple weeks, he's gone out there and put up some numbers. Week 11 versus Houston, I know they had to throw the football 50 times in that one. Tons of garbage time, 354 passing, a touchdown in that ball game, an interception, 2 rush yards. In Week 12 at Commanders, an efficient game, 247 pass yards, 2 touchdowns. So this week, a good matchup versus the New York Giants. Their defense hasn't been great all season long. Thanksgiving ball game for this Dallas Cowboy team. And I think Cooper Rush could go out there and be a serviceable option in 2 quarterback leagues and deep leagues, available 95% of fantasy leagues. That's a few quarterbacks I look to get off the wire for Week 13 of the fantasy football season.